It's time for an end of season edition of Eyes on AFL. In this series, we take a look at some of your takes and opinions about the AFL in its current state and its future. Now there were over 20 replies, so I can't fit them all in this video, but thanks to everyone who put a comment in. In today's takes, we have a team full of promise, a highly overrated coach, and a debate about the best grand final win in recent time. You Make Me Bored 9269 says North Melbourne can easily win up to 10 games next year with their young talent, getting a lot of games under their belt and some older players coming into the side. It's always hard to project so far in the future, but some of the signs this off-season are good. The club will add Jack Darling and Luke Parker in the mix for 2025. Now Darling is 32 and kicked just 22 goals in 2024, but he is a nice pickup. He'll give Nick Larkey at least some support forward of the ball and is an experienced premiership player to give some direction in the forward 50. We all know the standards Luke Parker sets. He can play midfield and forward too, giving the team more midfield grunt work and the forward line another crafty player. It's off-field where both should have significant impact in training levels and overall experience. But it's the possible additions of two players that could give North a big push up in squad depth and talent. If Caleb Daniel chooses to go to North Melbourne, he will be traded. Now who knows what the price will be, but he will make them instantly better. His clean kicking out of defence can help with their want for quick ball movement outside the defensive 50, and it allows Sheasel to permanently play midfield forward and allows Colby McKercher to transition to that part of the ground too. If the club can land Dan Houston as well, who wants to go back to Victoria from Port Adelaide, then it's another All-Australian defender to help transition the ball. In 2024, he was also the number 1 rated kick going inside 50. He will cost 2 first-round picks if Port Adelaide do decide to trade him, and it might be worth it for North Melbourne considering all the youth they already have. Now this youth can explode quickly, or it still might take some time, but if they can add a few more of these veteran players, there's no reason they can't push up to win 7 or 8 games at least. Their key defence depth isn't great, and neither are their small forwards, but on paper, it will be a much improved best 22, and off-field, you would think they would have a greater high performance culture. AFL Fantasy Tips and Tricks 4488 believes the Brisbane Grand Final win this year is more impressive than the Bulldogs in 2016. This is a tough one and a great question. But before we get into the comparison, there are actually quite a lot of similarities. Both sides had to win 4 finals, both played 2 games at the MCG, both teams defeated Sydney, and both had Josh Dunkley in their starting 22. Fittingly, if you cast your minds back to Dunkley's draft, the Sydney Swans had the chance to match the Bulldogs' bid as he was a father-son, but they declined. He's now won 2 premierships and both of them were against the club that could have had him. But how can you split these premiership wins? The Bulldogs one was a fairy tale. They were big underdogs in every single game and did come from the lowest seeding place, finishing 7th. They flew to West Coast in week 1 and caused a big boil over, then defeated the 3-time champions in Hawthorn, ending their dynasty. The preliminary final against GWS is still one of the great modern games. It was such a war, and the lead never eclipsed 3 goals on either side. And on grand final day, a 62-year drought was ended. Everyone talks about moments in these big games. There was Dale Morris's tackle leading to Tom Boyd's goal, Jake Stringer's snap, and Liam Picken's big mark. How can another team match that 4-game run? Well, Brisbane did finish 5th, but for context, they were a perennial contender compared to that Western Bulldogs side, who did make finals in 2015, but missed out on the 8 in the previous 4 years. Brisbane made the grand final in 2023, and were seen as a power team heading towards a premiership, and in the back half of this year, they really got their mojo going. They dealt with Carlton at home easily, but it's the 3 finals onwards that you can say match it with the Bulldogs. A historic 44-point comeback against GWS was all-time special. They looked dead and buried, but clawed their way back, and 2 clutch Joe Danaher goals will be remembered forever. But it gets even better the following week against Geelong. They had been beaten by the Cats in 2 previous preliminary finals and got their revenge. They were again down by 25 points in the third quarter, and even with a couple minutes left, found themselves behind. Rayner's explosion in the second half of the game sealed the result in the best game of 2024. To finish it off, they destroyed Sydney in such a stunning performance to leave no doubt who was the best side of the season. It still feels like the Bulldogs' premiership overall was more surprising, but Brisbane's level of difficulty in having to come back from big margins twice, you could say, was more challenging. If I add up all of the context and the 4 games each side endured, I still give the slight edge to the Bulldogs in 2016 as the more impressive of the premierships, although it's fair to say I might be a touch biased. Talia Mason 7986 is dropping the hammer on Sydney. They say John Longmire is a very good coach, but far from a great one due to his grand final record, and thinks he should leave, and says the blood culture we associate with Sydney has been lost. A lot of Sydney fans will be thinking this way. Now Longmire does have 1 premiership which no one can take away from him. So if we compare that with every AFL coach all time, he is great because only a small percentage achieve the ultimate success. But if you compare him with other highly regarded coaches like Clarkson, Scott, Matthews and others, that 1 win and 4 loss record probably puts him in a level below. So if you say those coaches previously mentioned are greats, then perhaps Longmire isn't one. It really depends on your own definition, standards, and who you compare him with to say if Longmire is a great or not. The criticism of the Bloods culture is an interesting viewpoint. It's one Paul Roos, former Sydney Premiership coach, also shared after the grand final. But it might just be the way the game is played now. Those Warriors mentioned like Bolton, Kirk, Richards and McVeigh were all great Sydney players in their era. The reality is, the AFL has clearly moved to a transition and running game. Scoring and defending off turnover is now the key indicator of success and does seem to override old school grunt work and one-on-one defence. You might reminisce about the former Bloods Warriors, but Heaney, Warner and Goulden, for example, did get the team to a grand final. They all match the needs of the current AFL player, and sure they are flashy highlight types, but maybe that's what is needed. They did get well beaten on grand final day, and they won't be the only ones to have that happen to them. It's not so much that the Bloods culture is dead. Again, 4 grand finals since 2012 points towards a strong culture. It's more that the style of play we connect with the phrase isn't as valuable as it once was. A good fit right now for a Bloods type of player would be James Rowbottom, who was one of Sydney's best on grand final day. Now Duval Magpie sent in a few, but let's focus on this take. Melbourne will finish last and begin a rebuild with Petrarca and Oliver to leave in 2026. The club might be reaching this point. Now Petrarca will stay in 2025, but it feels like there is plenty of water to go under that bridge. At the time of making this, Oliver's place at Melbourne feels 50-50. Geelong is an option, but surely a trade would be too complicated, although when Geelong wants someone, they normally find a way to get a deal done. Both players leaving in 2026 might actually be too late. It might happen sooner rather than later. If they do deal Oliver out, along with Alex Neil-Bullen, it does signal a clear reset, but maybe not an entire rebuild. The club should get a review done as soon as possible, and their focus surely has to be off-field rather than on it. If they finish last, then so be it, but it's critical to clean up the culture and get rid of all the negative noise around the club. If that involves firing some people and getting rid of players, then tough calls might have to be made. Once an agenda on fixing these issues is clear, then on field, adapting a new game style to match the modern game feels necessary. The reality is the contest and defense style hasn't delivered a finals win since 2021, and the best sides in the past 2 years have played fast football with skilled players who can score heavily off turnover. Thanks for watching another edition of Eyes on AFL. If you have any opinions yourself, feel free to leave them in the comments below to be featured in another video. Thanks for watching.